Yeah, I would really like to see a lot of different nations being added alongside with the French. I just don't really, I don't really like to just see France added in, but once again, in my first video I've stated that if I was just gonna be given choice to play France, I would obviously play France. That is absolutely no surprise. Bonjour, je suis Napoleon Total, and today we are back with part 2 of the French campaign. Obviously that intro was one that I totally butchered. And if you haven't watched my first video on the French campaign, I already basically went over what I would like in a French campaign. Notably, I would like to see France either in the Ardennes, in the Alps, and most notably in Syrian and Lebanon campaign. So that is basically last video, and for this video we're going to be covering the French weapons. For those that were wondering in my last video, is France actually going to be coming? And the answer and reason to that is yes. The French will be coming, and for reasons that we'll be covering in this video. As of right now, before I even get started on the weapon section, a lot of the French stuff that we see, we already have in game. One of them are the weapons, and once we do the weapon section, you'll see very quickly. Obviously, another part is that there already have been French voice lines being added in by Enlisted. Probably the biggest indication that a possible French campaigns there is that for France, we already have the 33rd Grenadier Division. Now, for those who don't recognize the 33rd Grenadier Division, it's actually the 33rd Panzer Grenadier SS Division, and that is also known to you and me as the Charlemagne Division, which has been covered in my Axis Berlin non-premium video, part 1 of course. But with that out of the way, those are the major reasons why France is potentially going to be added in the next campaign, or in, let's just say, the next campaign. They have already a lot of weapons, they have French voice lines, and they already have technically French units wearing German uniforms. But let's get started with the weapons. The first weapon that the French should have is the Lebel, and this is a World War I weapon made in 1886. The Lebel is similar to the Gewehr 34, and yeah, that's simple. Also, the Lebel is in-game, so that's that. Next we have the Berthier M816. It is also in-game, although it is mostly an Italian weapon. It is also used by the French. This weapon is pretty much used universally by every faction in World War II, although it's not as popular. Next, we have the MAS 636, and this one is obviously in Axis Normandy. So is the Berthier, but the Berthier is in Axis Tunisia. The MAS 36 is quite interesting in the sense that this is actually on a pretty good rifle if I've been using it correctly. And it's actually on par with the Enfield. And since we're going to have France, rifles are going to be the most important part, and having a good rifle really makes sense. Not to mention the fact that in a potential French campaign, there will not be any semi-automatic weapons, so having a rifle is really important. More on the French campaign speculation later. Next we have the SMGs. One of them is the Irma EMP, and this weapon was basically, it is in-game as of right now. This Irma EMP is pretty good. It's pretty good. It's on par with a lot of the better SMGs. The next one we have is my personal favorite, and that is the MAS 38. The only downside was that it was, the gun started production in 1940. It was mostly used by the French resistance in occupied France against the Germans, and it was mainly used by partisans against the Germans. And a notable fun fact is that the MAS 38 was used to kill Benito Mussolini in Italy. So this weapon is pretty good looking, and it's pretty famous. Next we have LMGs. Now LMGs is really an interesting part for me. The first one, a lot of these weapons we technically have in game. Well, off the bat we have the Chauchat, and this weapon is an allied Moscow, and if you haven't used that, it's basically very slow, slower than most SMGs. Yeah, it's interesting, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's good. Next we have the FM2429, and this thing is basically the French version of the ZB26. Obviously, every weapon on the list I'm just glancing over. Next we have the Hotchkiss M1922 machine gun, and this weapon is basically a French BAR. It's a French bar. And it looks like a bar. I don't know if it sounds like a bar because there's actually not a lot of working Hotchkiss M1922 machine guns, but it's actually quite interesting. This weapon might be the French N tier, light tier. In terms of tank, the French have the Panhard 178 with the Renault FT for their starting tanks. I rather prefer the Panhard 178 because that really is not really used in game. Next we have the AD-50 for an even lighter tank, which can be armed with 2 machine guns and cannons. If France is going to be given any heavy tanks, that they'd be given the Suma 35, which is a pretty solid tank. It's not the fastest, but it's good for its job. In terms of planes, the French have their own unique set of planes, the D-520 for fighters, and the Martin Maryland 167 for bombers, but in terms of dive bombers, not a lot is really known about them. And for older models, we even have more biplanes that we can use, which actually is not a bad idea, especially if France is going to be implemented during the early war period. Now, with that, the major weapons out of the way, let's move on to the mechanics. First off, I would like to see in this new French campaign a lot of different stuff, and the first thing I would like to see is diversity. And what I mean by diversity is that if France is going to be introduced with another Syrian campaign, or campaign in France itself, I would like to see some French troops with British Indian troops, Australian troops, and British troops themselves. And the reason is because I want Enlisted to grow. I want Enlisted to attract more and more people, and I don't want this game to die. And a good way now you want to attract more people is getting more diversity. And you might be thinking, oh wait, were there Indian troops in France? Yes. Were there Australian troops in France? Not really. But they were also in the Syrian/Lebanon campaign, which if you haven't watched my first video, I highly suggest that you do to understand a little bit more. Yeah, I would really like to see a lot of different nations being added alongside with the French. I just don't really, I don't really like to just see France added in, but once again, in my first video, I've stated that if I was just going to be given a choice to play France, I would obviously play France. That is absolutely no surprise. Another thing that I would like to see is an early war focus. Yes, the French campaign at the very start was in 1940/41, but honestly, as of right now, Enlisted doesn't really have an early war focused campaign. You can argue that Moscow is the early war campaign, but when you have AVS-36s and ZH-29s, it's not really an early war campaign. Especially when you have machine guns, MKB-42s. Yeah, that thing is not an early campaign experience. It is an almost mid-war experience at the very late. But I would really like to see an early war focus for France, and the reason is simple. That said, there are going to be problems such as the grind. It's going to be very hard for you to get kills using bolt-action rifles, so I would actually suggest that you guys, the Enlisted developers, increase the grind for this campaign. Also, another issue that I have is that for a French campaign, a lot of these weapons that I've stated right above are a lot of early war weapons, and it really doesn't work with early war weapons at the beginning, and then a lot of OP in development weapons that weren't even used in Enlisted. I honestly don't like weapons that are going to be deployed that don't fit the time period. Case in point, please don't give us assault rifles in 1940. Please don't give us that. Moscow at the late game, the MKB-42 is really stretching the limits. But in a French campaign, I would really like to see an early war focus with bolt-action rifles. As of right now, every campaign, after a certain time period, you just get semi-automatic weapons, and that's not even fun. Another thing is that with the Stalingrad release, once again, it was terrible. Please do not make the campaign pay to win. Please. The average player does not want another pay-to-win campaign like Stalingrad. For the love of Jesus Christ, please give us a campaign that everyone just can have fun in. And we don't really have to think about the grind because level 1 weapons are the same as level 20 weapons with bolt-action rifles, and I hopefully that thinks that's the point. Another big thing that I would like to have is no closed maps. What that means is that we will have bigger maps, and the reason why I would like to have open maps is that enjoy the scenery. Enlisted has a lot of good graphics. Enlisted is pretty good at making the graphics look wonderful, and I really like that. So please give us big open maps, especially if you're going to give us the Ardennes. Like, the Ardennes has a lot of cover in terms of trees, bunkers that the French built that was somewhat connected to the Maginot Line, and I really do like the early war experience. So please give us open maps, early war experience. Don't make it like Berlin, which, I'm not gonna lie, I really like Berlin, but Berlin is not stress, but it's a lot of stress. You have to be really quick on your reflexes, and Berlin is very close quarters combat, and you have to be very fast to react. Another thing I would like is spread out objectives that makes one squad engage more possible, which that really translate to, once again, as bigger maps, bigger engagements, and I really would like to see some bigger maps. Finally, if we're gonna implement France in the Syrian campaign, please give us logistics. A big problem as of right now, Enlisted, you really, with an ammo box, you can just build ammo boxes left and right. You don't really have to worry about ammunition, especially if, with the exception of when your engineer dies. During the French-Syrian campaign, the Lebanon-Syrian campaign, Indian troops would take an objective, but they will run out of ammunition, and they will have to retreat because they have ran out of ammunition, and I would really like to have that implemented into the game. Also, with the diversity and the stuff like I just talked about, I really would like to see Indian troops, especially for a French-Syrian campaign, but I will not be disappointed if they give us France in 1940. With that said, I really hope that a French campaign is going to be the game changer. I really would like to see France in game, and that said, guys, have a great day. Like, subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and join the Discord for more updates. Have a great day, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Now, before you leave, I would like to thank you very much for watching this video. I will be honored if you could like and subscribe to the channel. Remember, more videos are coming out, so it is a good idea to click on that notification button. Anyways, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.